Let me serve thee. Let me worship thee alone. Thou art God, and all thee. Lord, let my attention be forever fixed upon thee. Let me love thee, let me serve thee, let me worship thee alone. Thou art God, and all thee. Lord, let my attention be forever fixed upon thee. Let me love thee, let me serve thee, let me worship thee alone. Thou art God, and all Lord, let my attention be forever fixed upon thee. Let me love thee, let me serve thee, let me worship thee alone. Thou art God, and all thee. Lord, let my attention be forever fixed upon thee. Let me love thee, let me serve thee, let me worship thee alone. Thou art God, and all thee. Lord, let my attention be forever fixed upon thee. Let me love thee, let me serve thee, let me worship thee alone. Thou art God, and all thee. Thou art God, and all thee.
So chanting like that seems like the best part of the service is already done. Let us pray together. O Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, beloved Jesus Christ, blessed Master, dearest Mother, saints and sages of all religions, we bow to all of you. Free our lives from all obstacles. And give us physical, mental, and spiritual development. Make my mind thy temple. Make my heart thy altar. Make my love thy home. Thou the only King. Reigning on the throne of my consciousness. Peace. Peaceless. Amen. Carla is having a rare miss from service today. She's been sick for the last 6 days with cold and flu. And it's interesting. Yesterday I started to feel coming down with some of the symptoms that she's been having. So remember Sri Yukteswar's admonition that an unacknowledged guest soon leaves. How do you do that with something that's coming on you? And it's interesting to watch the mind and how it entertains perhaps getting sick if you feel the symptoms coming on. And when you take your mind off the symptoms, then what do you put it on to? So in my case, yesterday, I started thinking about the light coming in, the light and the sound coming in through the medulla, and then flooding the area that had those symptoms in the throat and the sinuses that were starting to congest and to get irritated. And so that was good. And I continued with that for some time. And then suddenly I found my mind going to later in the day, we had a time that we were going to celebrate Lois's birthday. to the dinner and then service today. And I thought, well, what if the symptoms come, and what will I do? And the mind started going with that. Well, that's actually an opening for the symptoms. So you have to erase that immediately and see the light, see the healing power coming in and taking care of me and sustaining me through all of that. And so gradually through the day, the symptoms started to abate. And gradually they left me completely. So it's a very interesting thing when you really look at our attachments, look at our fears, look at the tendencies of our mind. And does it bring in light? Does it bring in healing? Does it bring in love? Or does it go down the path of fear? Or does it begin to see itself limited, or that there is an inevitability? Master was truly a son of his guru, Sri Yukteswar. And they talked about the power of affirmations. Now, affirmations are most powerful when you not only repeat it with your tongue, but also with your mind. And not only with your mind, but also with your emotions. You have to engage your entire self. You have to really believe it in order to give its full power. And then to take it even a step higher, you feel that it is God who is flowing through you as that affirmation, and that there is a supreme power and intelligence that it's at work, far beyond your own knowing even. And you open yourself to that, and you feel that God is speaking through you through that affirmation. So many people do affirmations, but secretly in the background, the unconscious is discounting what's being said. It doesn't really believe it. So we have to cultivate it on a deeper level if we really want to see the results. And affirmations are very good, but they need to be fully engaged with all the way. In addition to keeping Carla in your prayers, I'd like you to keep Diane Durkin. She's going through a particularly rough time. She contracted an illness some time ago that is an autoimmune disorder, that it actually starts eating your muscles away. Your immune system starts attacking your own muscular system. And she lost a great deal of muscular mass quite quickly, and she was put on to, they don't really know what to do or how to cure it, other than to give her some drugs that will slow down the immune system, but that has its own consequences as well. And then John, her husband, they were center leaders for many years, has also had some diagnosis, and he has some health issues as well. So prayer goes through an evolution. When I used to pray, my mother taught me the prayer, "Now I lay me down to sleep," that we would say every night before we go to bed. I pray the Lord my soul to keep. And if I should die before I wake, that's quite a thought for you as you're going to sleep. Pray the Lord my soul to take. So at least you're covering your bases before you go out during the night. But I remember thinking about that prayer, and it was praying to a God that I didn't necessarily feel or know in any significant kind of a way. It just seemed like praying to a being that was somewhere in the picture. I wasn't quite sure how it all fit in, but I said it because I was taught that prayer. And I think it did good as well. But how much more when we start to really feel that there is a supreme being. And then we pray, and we pray for perhaps seeing that that supreme being will be beneficent and will extend his grace to whomever we are praying about, whether it's ourselves or somebody else or a world situation. But it's rather distant. And as I continued down this path, my prayer took an evolutionary turn. And at some point, I started feeling myself deeply connected with the person I was praying for. I could feel that individual. It didn't happen every time, but it happened more and more frequently. And I would feel myself connected with that person, and I would feel my own connection with God through deepened meditation. And as a result of that, I would feel a power flowing through me. It wasn't my power, but it was flowing through me, and it was going out to that individual that I felt connected with. And then it took even a deeper turn, and it's more difficult to talk about in the sense that it's hard to describe. But you feel yourself in a deep communion as if you are that individual yourself. And you feel yourself as well connected to God. If you're just connected with the individual, there's not much that's going to happen. You feel what they're feeling. You have that sympathy, that empathy. But when you feel your connection with God, there's not even a flow of God. But God is radiating in you, and you are identified with the individual. And through that power of prayer, something gets awakened in that individual. Whether the person is suffering from something physical, perhaps it's emotional or mental, perhaps there's a spiritual schism. And through that connection, there's an uplifting and a beginning of a transformation. So let's really think about this power of prayer, because there is a great deal in it if you go deeper and deeper with it. I thought I would read to you from a posting that I sent out most recently, and it's entitled Speaking Truth. Years ago, I took a solemn vow to God, always speak the truth. There are many disciplines one can take up, but this is one of the most stringent. You may think, well, I generally speak the truth, but generally won't do. It must be every word. When I was young, I would tell a lie to avoid getting into trouble. It was based on fear, so truth and courage must go hand in hand. Even into my adult years, I might have said something that was untrue, even if it was shading a thing to make myself look better. So, to speak the truth means you are simple, open, without guile or pretense, like an innocent child. There is one essential component that must accompany truth for it to be complete, and that is love. The intention of what is said must be for the highest good of all. I have seen so-called truth used like a bludgeon, a cruel stroke, not meant to heal, but to hurt and dominate. This is not truth, for the intention behind the revelation comes with a crooked purpose. It is based on a lie. In the Mahabharata, Krishna works to mediate a solution with Duryodhana before the Great War, but the egotistical king is foiling for a fight and refuses to budge. After the war, Duryodhana angrily berates Krishna for causing the war and relates a number of events when blaming him. As the reader, we know that what Duryodhana is saying is factually true. Krishna tells Duryodhana that all he says is a lie. To understand Krishna's response, we must go behind the scenes and understand that the Lord is not responding to the outward facts, but Duryodhana's premise that the war was Krishna's fault. In reality, it was Duryodhana who pushed the world into cataclysm. A series of facts alone does not alone determine truth. I have seen an individual tell all the worst things about himself at the first meeting in a social situation. On the surface, it may seem he is a humble person. But looking a little deeper, rather than self-abnegation being the reason he is truthful, he is actually trying to preserve his ego. It is an attempt to inoculate himself. If the worst is said by me, then you will not criticize me, for I've already done that, and even exaggerated my faults. So you see, it is not truth because one is an exaggeration, and two, the motivation is not humility, but egotism, the socially intended purpose is a falsehood. Once when I was crossing the border into Canada, the guard asked me a question. I went on to add information to my answer. He very curtly cut me off and said I should only answer the question asked. I took this to heart. Always speaking the truth does not mean we must say everything we know. We only need to know that what we say is true. To make sure this is not a sin of omission, we need to know our purpose in choosing our words. If by not saying something, somebody is harmed, then we should carefully consider our action. We must be clear if it is the falsehood of fear or desire nature that is driving our words. There are many tests in everyday circumstances for us to speak the truth and know the truth. Some people have the tendency to see the worst in everything. Listening to the news can make the world seem a terrible place. However, the news is very one-sided. It is almost all bad news. Little is said about the vast majority who did not suffer trauma on a particular day. Because there is such a lack of balance, it is not the truth. On the other hand, there are those who do not want to face the truth because it makes them uncomfortable or it is painful. This is lopsided in the other direction. And some will watch a show about an extremely bad situation and say, now that is real life. But whose real life is it? Does that mean that all those who are not drug addicts, victims of abuse or murder, do not have real lives? And then there are those who become livid at what they hear about a public figure. Yet how are we to know the inner person and the whole situation from what is reported? Truth means we do not distort the reality. Truth goes to the heart of the matter with clarity, not swayed by emotion or bias. When truth and love go together, it does not diminish the clarity of truth. There are some very hard realities about life, and people commit acts of evil that should not be swept under the rug. However, as a member of this world, and that world includes the evil which is done, if our outrage for wrong action disconnects us from God and the universal vision, then our emotional reaction cannot be said to represent the whole truth. If someone has suffered some trauma in his life, then he sees someone else suffer a similar fate, and he sees red, consumed with hatred at the action. Then he is not dealing with the whole truth, but a painful reaction to his own past that is projected upon the present. Those committing terrible acts must be stopped. And that is a loving act for the villain as well as the victim. Because although the victimizer may be jailed or face consequences for his actions, he is prohibited from further heinous actions that would continue to further darken his soul. To know the truth in its totality, you must have a calm mind. By meditating deeply, you pierce the veil of separation and realize the all-pervasive spirit. You know truth as God knows it. And through the universal vision, you realize that you cannot be separate from any part of creation. To perceive truth on this level entails more than always speaking the truth. However, speaking the truth is a prerequisite in attaining and becoming established in this higher plane of consciousness. Those who lie and try to cover things up and then go on to say they represent the highest truth cannot be what they say they are. Let us explore together the practice of speaking the truth. It is one of the great disciplines we may engage in. As we go further into it, let us then be focused on realizing the supreme truth at its highest level. How do we know we have come into knowing this higher truth? The great Master Jesus said that when you know the truth, it sets you free. No truer words have ever been spoken. There are many equations. What is equal to God? Can be said that love is God and God is love. Mother used to say life is God and God is life. And you can equally say that God is truth and truth is God. To be separated from truth cannot allow us to enter into that supreme reality. We may have the bliss of God, but the bliss of God leads us to the purity of God. The purity of God leads us to the truth of God. Perhaps we enter in by wanting to know what the truth is. When I started this journey toward God, I had two goals that I had in mind. And one was to know the bliss of God, because I was in such a spiritual, painfully difficult place. And the other is I wanted to know the truth. And I felt that these two things were absolutely essential. As I said in the writing, I didn't always speak the truth. And I don't say that with any pride whatsoever. It's miserable when you don't speak the truth. You have to try to remember. You have to try to have everything balanced when you're not speaking the truth. Who did I say this to, and who did I say that to? And generally, things are discovered anyway. But the greatest penalty for not speaking the truth, I heard one time a saying, and I think it's quite true, the greatest penalty for a person who's a habitual liar is not that they will not find somebody else who will believe them, because they'll always find people who believe them. The greatest penalty is they will never believe anyone else, because they are so habituated to lying. They just think everybody must be doing the same thing. It puts you on guard not to speak the truth, and it separates you from God. So in order to really know God, we must make a determination in ourselves to always speak the truth. Think of this world. If everybody spoke the truth, how that would change this world. How many people have gone down darkened roads, and oftentimes they've done something wrong perhaps, but what really gets them into trouble is that they try to hide what they've done. To be simple, to be open, to be childlike means that you live not with a calculating mind. We saw Jesus come up against some different lawyers, and they would try to trap him. They would try to cleverly word things in order to make him look foolish. One of them was the Sadducees, who actually did not believe in an afterlife. And they were quite dismissive because Jesus spoke of an afterlife and a kingdom of heaven. You might think it's strange that somebody has a religious life but doesn't think of an afterlife, but that's the way that it was at the time. And so they would ask him, well, if a man is married, and then that man's wife dies, and then he gets married again, and that happens 7 different times, what happens with that? It's a total mess. And Jesus said, when you are in the kingdom of heaven, you live as brother and sister. You no longer have those particular kinds of relationships and feelings that you once did. Sri Yukteswar said that when you pass from this body and into the astral world, you meet so many different individuals who, through past lifetimes, have been mother, father, brother, sister, husband, wife, children, that you are actually a little bit confused as who to love the most, because you've had these deep relationships with so many different people. And so it is that we universalize our vision. We open our hearts to everyone, because everyone has God in them. And we love God first and foremost above everything else. This gives us an impersonal vision of life. And when we hear the word impersonal, we can think, oh, that's cold and aloof, but that's not what it means at all. It just means that we're not limited to an individual. Some people only want to love one person or just their family group. or perhaps their community, but anything that's outside of that, or their religion. And anything that's outside of that is totally forbidden. And this is a terribly limiting viewpoint. It is the beginning of love, but it is not the end of love. Love can only end in a completely universal vision because God is love and love is God. As was said before. And so we look to open our hearts. And how do you open your heart? You connect with God through your deepened meditation. You begin to really ask God to open your heart, because loving other people is fine. But there is a much higher form of love that comes directly from God. God flows through your heart and flows through your heart out to everyone and everything. Part of the universal vision is that everything is made up of God stuff. And when we love with the love of God, we love everything that is. Now, from a human standpoint, we might say this isn't always true. Somebody does something very terrible. And we may be put into a position where we have to stand up to that individual because what they're doing is not correct. And God calls upon us to be a warrior out on the field of truth. And as a result of that, we stand up to what they are doing. We do everything in our power to stop that situation from continuing. Mother talked about one time when she was in a store, and there was a mother standing in front of a case that had a number of items in it. And her son, young son, walked between her and the case, and she just hauled off and cuffed him on the top of the head. Mother was standing behind her and watching all this. And suddenly Mother was looking at her. Well, I've seen Mother look like that before, and I can only imagine must have been felt like having lasers at the back of the woman's head, and suddenly she became aware that there's a great heat going on behind her, and she turned around to see what it was about, and she saw Mother. And Mother just looked at her, uncompromising. And suddenly the mother was aware of what she had done. And so she spoke to her son in a much softer voice, and she said, well, just when I'm looking at something, don't get in front of me. And took a completely different tone with it. And so there are these times when we're called upon to do what we can do to set the situation right. We must adhere to the truth at all times, but we must do it with love. To use truth simply as a weapon, and I've seen it done many times. One time I remember I was up at a center up in North Canada, and a young woman had gotten into a car wreck, and there was a great deal of talk around that you create everything that happens in your life. And so an older woman in a very almost angry tone asked her, well, what were you doing that made you have an accident? Actually, the other person ran into her. And it wasn't done in a loving way at all. It wasn't done with a viewpoint of helping that individual to grow. It was done to dominate that woman. And that's wrong. It's wrong when it happens. We have to remember, we are here to be a blessing to this world, not to curse it. There are plenty who curse this world, but we are here to bless this world, to help lift it up. And it doesn't mean we look away or that we soft soap everything and don't really tell the truth about it. We're in the business of truth. Of course, we want to know the truth. But to know the truth completely means that you identify with the individual. This is not excuse making for people who misbehave. But to understand the total situation, you have to understand that individual, where they're at in their evolutionary course, what they're dealing with internally and externally. Sometimes we see people and they're not at their best. There's a lot going on in their lives. And we see them with love and with compassion, with understanding who that soul is. And when you do that, you go behind the scenes. You go to the inner person. There was a book that talked about when you meet somebody with unlovely qualities. I love that characteristic, unlovely qualities. You look for the person behind those qualities. So let's say somebody is very angry. They get angry often. Look at the person who's behind the anger. What are they dealing with? For one thing, they themselves are the first victim of their own anger. It runs through their body. It gets their adrenaline glands going. That's part of it, is they feel the power of it, but it's a useless power. Because after all that adrenaline, all that anger has been expended out, there's nothing but a sense of emptiness afterwards. And so it makes that person even more desperate to be in control, which can then feed even more anger and so on. It's such a useless thing to do. And it creates such harm for the individual and those people around them. And so you look for that individual who's struggling behind the scenes, the soul within that one, who's struggling to bring the light into their own mind, into their own emotional body, into their own consciousness. And you get a greater understanding for that individual. Now, it doesn't mean when they do something wrong. It doesn't mean that it's okay. It's not approval, but it is understanding, and it is compassion. And from that point of compassion and understanding, you're in a much better position to be of help to that individual. Now, it may be silent help. And that is, you pray for that individual. You feel God flowing from you into that individual. Or you feel yourself identifying with the individual, and you feel the greatness of God within you. And what you're doing is you're helping to awaken the light in that person, to bring them into a higher state of being, to recognize the truth. You know, oftentimes we lie to ourselves, and we do it in so many different ways, but one of them is we minimalize our impact upon this world. Why does everybody else treat me so meanly? Well, have we taken a look in the mirror and see what it is that we have done? Perhaps because out of our own fear, we have given some hidden permission for that person to treat you meanly. Or perhaps you don't act so nicely yourself all the time, and it's coming back to you. So you have to really take a good hard look at yourself. That's part of truth, is being able to analyze yourself. Now, that's isn't going overboard. People who are too much prone to see all of their faults are not telling the truth either, because they don't see God in themselves. They don't see the beauty. They don't see the light, and that surely exists inside of them. So it must be a whole picture, a complete picture, in order for it to be the real truth. Now, we struggle as devotees. We are aspirants after God realization, and we fall short. It would be nice to say that we all just run directly to the goal, and occasionally that happens. But most of us are a little bit mixed in nature, huh? We want God, but we also have these hidden thieves that are inside our subconscious minds. They lie in wait for an opportunity to steal the consciousness and to take it in a direction away from God. And we struggle with that. Now, there is nothing shameful in any of that. It's just simply we must be aware of it. And we must strive with everything in us, with all of our hearts, with all of our minds, with all of our strength and all of our soul. We must strive to rise up, to lead a better life. If we find ourselves making the same errors again and again, perhaps making excuses for them, but they just simply, we're not doing our work. You're not really doing your sadhana. You must go deeper. You must draw from greater reserves inside of you. And it's not just you, remember that. That God inside of you is awakening himself in you. So you align yourself with God. Why rob yourself of the greatest power in this entire creation? By thinking it's all you, and there's no help So you draw upon that. You feel God coming right into that sore spot. Now, many of us don't want to look at that sore spot. We'd rather avoid it. But you can just, if it's a repeating pattern, you can go right to the center of it. Feel how helpless you feel in the situation. How many times it's repeated itself in you. And then you shine the light of God right in that most helpless, desperate, repetitive nature. And you feel God awakening himself inside of the darkest part of you. Open up those closets in the deep subconscious mind and let the light shine in when we chant God's name. At first it's with our lips, then it's with our mind, and gradually it starts to work its way through. It's the most wonderful thing when you're in a dream. And suddenly you remember God. Perhaps you start to chant spontaneously. You know then that you are making inroads into the subconscious mind, and that it's beginning to really do its work. It's like the yeast in the bread that starts to rise and make everything get better. But we have to keep the oven warm with our own devotion towards God, with our own thoughts of God, with our own desire to realize that highest state of divine consciousness. I'd like to read from you from the most recent journal. It's Mother talking about Master. After I met Master, I was just glued to him, body, mind, and soul. To me, there was God in human form. He had given a new meaning to life, a new meaning to prayer, a new meaning down all the religion. He had made me know that the Christ was within me, that his wonderful radiance was around me, that he was there helping me in every single thing. He told me to forget about hellfire and damnation and to think only of God, to know that I was his beloved child, and that always and forever he held me in his arms. It was a transition from what I had been taught and what I feared growing up as a child. So I did the best I could, and I wouldn't write to him or get in touch with him until I just couldn't solve something myself. Perhaps it was an illness that I had been coping with because I've had much in the form of experience during my life. When I couldn't do anything more myself, then I would write to him. And I always felt that every time I asked him for something, that I had to give him something. I remember that all I had in the world was $3.50. I sent him the $3 and kept the 50 cents. And strangely enough, about a week and a half later, I received the most beautiful letter from him, thanking me for his generous gift and asking me if I would accept one from him in return. And he sent me $6. So I doubled my money. That's a very good investment. I know what it means to be in want. I know what it means to reach out for God. And in all the things that I was denied in the material sense, I was supplied with in spirit. I grew strong. I learned patience. I learned understanding. I learned to do without worldly things, and to realize that man indeed does not live by bread alone, but by every word that issueth forth from the mouth of God. We are constantly supplied with his energy, and we get food from the sun. We get food from the oxygen we breathe. We get food from the water we drink. We get food from the thoughts that come in our consciousness from God above. If we would only be a watchdog, standing at the gates of our minds and watch over the thoughts that come in and choose to live only with those that are high and mighty and beautiful and filled with the Spirit of God, how wonderful our lives would be if we would only be a watchdog, standing at the gates of our minds and watch the thoughts that come in and choose to live only with those that are high and mighty and beautiful and filled with the Spirit of God. How wonderful our lives would be. And this is such a tremendous truth, such a tremendous truth. We can hear the words, but as soon as we get up from our meditation, do we just go out and shift into automatic gear once again? And our thoughts go every which way. And we do not stand at the gates of the mind. We do not watch our thoughts. We do not watch our tongue. Mother called the out of control tongue a cannonball, shooting out cannonballs from, and for some people, you really feel it. You can feel assaulted by the words that they say, by the energy that comes out from them. And so in order to really go to work on ourselves, we must watch this mind. We must be careful. Now, this doesn't make us a very dull person. It doesn't make us uninterested in this world or the things of this world. We can continue with that. But we really only think the highest. One time when I was sitting with Mother, she said, when you swear, she didn't say, notice she didn't say if you swear. She said, when you swear, say God bless it. Because then you're asking God to bless it. Doesn't that make sense? And it did make sense. But I really had to work on that. There's a time in my life when my language is not very pure, we might say. It could be quite colorful. And it was a sign of the times. You know, it's what friends do, and so you do the same thing that friends do. I couldn't imagine speaking like that. It would be painful to me to speak like that today. And when I hear other people speak like that, it's painful to hear. It's wonderful when you say, God bless it. One of the things I said to Mother, though, is I said, but Mother, when you say it, you mean it. She said, not always. So that happens sometimes. But you cultivate in your mind, God bless this situation. God bless this situation. God bless this situation. And He will. As you attune your mind to Him more and more deeply, you create a conduit through which He can flow. I also wanted to read something from Ramakrishna. I've been thinking a lot about Ramakrishna. I had the most beautiful experience with him when I was in India. We went to Dakshineshwar, and that was the temple that was built. It was a new temple at the time, and Ramakrishna was invited there by his brother to become a priest. And as Ramakrishna would be in devotion towards the various deities, there's the 9 temples of Shiva there, there's one to Krishna, there's different ones, and there's one to Mother Kali. And Mother Kali is the Divine Mother, and she's rather fierce. She's got her red tongue hanging out of her mouth. She's got skulls that are a necklace around her. She holds a sword in one hand, and so she's tough. She's a tough one. But it represents something. All of these skulls are egos that the Divine Mother has severed from the individual soul. And she wears them proudly around her neck. And Ramakrishna discovered that as you really meditate upon this very, very fierce Divine Mother, that what results when you see her true form is she is absolutely beautiful and beguiling. But because of his great devotion, and his mind was merging in with the Divine Mother, he was supposed to put sandal paste onto the statue of the Divine Mother, and he's supposed to put garland around her neck and so on, and the worship. And he was a priest, and there's very exact standards for this. If you deviate even just a little bit, the whole temple has to be cleansed and purified and done in a new way. But Ramakrishna was in such a state as he is worshiping the Divine Mother that he would put the sandal paste on his own head because he wasn't sure what was Divine Mother and what was himself. Himself would disappear. And he felt that Divine Mother was dwelling in him. So he would put the sandal paste on him. He would put the flowers around his own neck. And then, horror of horrors, he would go into samadhi and his feet would be pointing towards the Divine Mother. This is totally not okay. And other priests would come in and they would kick him and try to rouse him, accuse him of being drunk and everything else. And if it hadn't been for the manager, who one time saw Ramakrishna walking back and forth, and to his astounded open eyes, the form of Ramakrishna suddenly turned into Shiva. And it was through that experience that he knew this is no ordinary individual, so he protected him. And eventually, he disqualified himself from being a priest because of his great love for God. That's a bit of an irony, isn't it? And so he continued on, but they allowed him to be able to stay in the temple precinct. So we went into that room. And what a wonderful, powerful vibration is in that room. Then we went out to the Mother Kali and temple, and they opened up the doors at a particular time to the statue. And all these people were all lined up, and I didn't feel like competing with all of these people. So Swami Vishwananda and I were standing off at a little bit of a distance. And suddenly, it was a very interesting thing. A priest came out from a side door, and he walked directly over to me. I don't think he spoke any English, but he took my elbow, and he guided me to that door, and he took me around all of these people who were all pressing in to get a view of this image. Maybe 100 people were there, and he took me around and into the side door, and Swami Vishwananda followed right along and took me right up to the front of where the Mother Kali was, on the inside of the gate, from where other people were. It's the most interesting thing, isn't it? And so God takes care of you oftentimes like this. But on another day, we went over to Bulur and that is where the Samadhi temple of Ramakrishna, he never lived there, but they have this most remarkable, beautiful temple that's there. It's all marble floors. And so we walked up, it's a vast room, and at the head of it is a statue of Ramakrishna. And so we sat in meditation, perhaps 30 or 40 people were there, and we were sitting in meditation. And suddenly I was lifted up, and I had a vision of this master. And he was most beautiful, and I can't even tell you why, but I laid my head down on his lap in this inner vision, which felt very, very real to me. Very as real as anything that I experienced in this world. And perhaps because I had read, there was a disciple who had come to Ramakrishna, and he would come after a full day's work. And oftentimes he would just lay his head down on the master's lap, and he would go to sleep right there while everybody was talking and all this activity was going on. I don't know if that's why I did it, I just did it. And I laid my head on his lap, and he put his hand on my head. And suddenly I went out into the purely impersonal. God is spirit, where there's no image, no form, nothing at all. Well, I was in this state for quite some time. I can't even tell you. But by the time that I came down into more dualistic consciousness, I looked around. There is nobody that was left sitting next to the floor, on the floor next to me. And the doors had been shut on the image of Ramakrishna. And how much time had gone by, I don't know. But it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. So this is a great, great God-man. Mother had one comment, negative comment, around him, and that is that he continued to go into samadhi at the drop of a hat. And he fell down and he broke his arm one time. And she felt that he should have gone beyond that state, where he was in that sahaja samadhi state, a continual state of consciousness, where he didn't get divorced from this world, but you carried that state on in this world. And so that was the one thing she would talk about with him. But she thought that that should have been something more that he had attained. But here he's talking about true devotion and love. Some bhaktas, that's a lover of God, after attaining samadhi or God consciousness, when they return, retain the sense of I, as I am his servant, I am his devotee. They do not lose the sense of I entirely, but keep a small portion of it to repeat the holy name of the Lord, to sing his praises, and to love and to serve him. Again, those who constantly practice the sense of the servant, I, eventually reach the Supreme Lord. This is the path of bhakti, or devotion. But true devotion is very rare. True devotion leads to intense love for God. And when the intense love comes, the divine being is not very far. In that intense love, the sense of worldliness is wiped out entirely, and the whole heart and soul rest upon nothing but the Lord of the universe. Some are born with this intense love for God. It is natural with them. Its expression is to be found even in their childhood. At that tender age, even, they cry out for God. There are many examples, such born bhaktas like Prahlada and others. Ordinary devotion, which is confined by scriptural law of sacrifice and worship, is preparatory. That is, in hot weather, one fans oneself for a breath of air, so long as the breeze is not blowing. But when the breeze springs up, the fan is no longer needed. And so this is something that we strive for. This is great devotion, this great love for God. And it comes as a yearning. It comes as a desire. Now, in the beginning, we don't have that realization. And so the desire, the yearning is painful. But it is a good pain. How many tears do we cry for this world? How many thoughts do we have for this world? How many yearnings for this world? And how rare it is to have a yearning, a thought, a desire for God alone. So let those tears come if they are tears. Krishna said that every tear that is cried for God is like a pearl on his necklace. And so you are just adding to his necklace. That's the good thing, isn't it? And so you let those tears come because tears can be cleansing. But most of all, you let that desire to thrive. Don't worry if you think, wow, what will this world do without me? I have so many obligations. I have this and that. Let God take care of that. That doesn't make you careless about the things of this world. You are as good a steward as you can be. But if for some reason God takes you out of this world, he will see to it that everything is taken care of for you. I know that because that's been my case. And so you give everything to God, everything that you are, everything that you think, every part of you. You give to him and he takes it. And then he begins to do what is necessary in order to purify yourself so that you become a fit temple. And then you are surrendered completely and totally to him. You know, sometimes when I give talks, God has me repeat some of the same stories. And I think, God, there are other stories. And there are other portions of my life. There's other things to talk about here, but he keeps going back to some particular themes. He hammers away at those themes because they have an importance. They have a power. They have something to say. And until we can overcome every obstacle and rise up into that divine consciousness, then we take the wings of that power and we let it lift us up into divine consciousness. When Mother would repeat a story, I would think, I want to be in the same consciousness that she is when she's telling that story. So you see, the challenge was on me. Would I rise up? Would I become as she was? And I'm still working on it. But I can feel that power of God working through me. And it's a total surrender, I can tell you. There's not 1 ounce of it that you can keep for yourself. Not 1 ounce. But if you will do that, He will take your life. He will use it to the best and highest advantage for His purposes. And He will transform you. And in that transformation, you will realize the truth as you have never known it before. It is not speculation. It is not reading a book in order to gain more information. These things are all right for the purpose that they have. But to know God, you go beyond book learning. You go beyond even what somebody else thinks or says. You rise up into that same consciousness that the great spiritual masters, that Jesus or Krishna, Master or Mother, what they experienced, what they knew, what they became. You don't become a carbon copy because God has created each individual their own unique aspect of His supreme consciousness. But what is identical, what is the same, is the God experience that you have, the bliss that you have, the light that you have, the knowingness that you are one with Him and He with you. These are not words that we can say lightly. We must test ourselves to the furthest extreme in order to know that divine consciousness, but we can do it. It is our purpose in this life. And it is the truth of your own being. Now will you please pray with me? O Heavenly Father,
O Heavenly Father,
Divine Mother,
Divine Mother,
I feel the wonder and the beauty
I feel the wonder and beauty
of Thy glorious presence
of Thy glorious
in
presence
every part of my being.
in every part of my being.
My heart is bursting with my love for Thee.
My heart is bursting with my love for
I
Thee.
kneel in adoration at Thy feet
I kneel in adoration at Thy feet
and surrender myself to Thee.
and surrender myself to Thee.
I feel the power of Thy perfection
I feel the power of Thy perfection
surging in every cell of my body.
surging in every cell of my body.
My mind and my intelligence
My mind and my intelligence
are radiant with Thy healing light.
are radiant with Thy healing light.
My soul is filled with the ecstasy and bliss
My soul is filled with the ecstasy and bliss
of my communion with Thee.
of my communion with Thee.
I and my Father are one.
I and my Father are one.
Blessed Spirit, I am He.
Blessed Spirit, I am He.
Peace,
Peace,
bliss.
bliss.
Amen.
Amen.
Pronouns about great light. Plans are that we will be heading south soon, and we plan to take advantage of time in the desert to work on Mother's books and to continue with that. Been a great deal of work done in that area, and hope to be able to make good progress and report on it next time that we come back. So we will definitely be back in December and for the Christmas festivities. Always you are in my thoughts and my prayers. And we will have internet connections, so through email, texting, those kinds of things, we can stay in contact as well. Where we started on the North American pilgrimage back in 2005. God had been withdrawing me in a way. And of course, as I said at the time, that I had this death was following me. And that's no longer the case. I haven't felt it. Interestingly, that went away when I was diagnosed with cancer. So you'd think it'd be just the opposite, but perhaps that was because the road to health was then being paved. But there's a certain withdrawal, going deeper inside of myself and less going out into the world. And that has continued with me. So it's a time that we can take these truths, really put them to work in our lives. Really put them to work. Don't be caught at some later time wishing that you had made greater effort, that you had done more. Do it today. Do it now, so that you don't live with that regret ever. That you sing God's name, you meditate upon Him. With your Kriya, you go deeper and deeper into the stillness. All of these tools, the greatest tools in the world, but they don't do any good unless you put them to use. And let us support each other and love each other. It's wonderful when devotees come together and speak of God and speak of the path, and everyone feels uplifted. So let us keep the spirit going and growing until it becomes our all and all in all. Om Shri Ram.